Hello, everyone. My name is Rob Phillips. Sometime back in October, I published a video called Grokism, Authentication Authorization to Bridge the Gap between Web 2 and Web 3. Now, I get people typically have have a misunderstanding, or at least I'd say they've expanded the definition of what Web 3 is. So I'm going to go back and do a little bit of history, and then I'm going to start demonstrating how Grokism will be able to solve a little bit of these problems. So if you think about how identity worked, um, typically it's controlled from within an organization. So uh, I'm thinking of like Active Directory. I'm thinking of SSH keys. I'm thinking of ACLs. Now, the problem with that ultimately is that this is all within an organization. So, in other words, you've already logged into your organization resources, right? So, all that's really happening is you're given authorization, you're given authentication and authorization then through various methodologies, sometimes through these things called ACLs or SSH keys or, something similar to that, right? Again, all within an organization. When I think about Web3 and I think about this idea of scaling up or scaling out to the world, it means that we have to have some way for people to maintain an identity on, maintain this ability to authorize and authenticate against whatever apps might use it when you don't own or when it's not within an organization. Now, typically, there have been ways to do that. There have certainly been methodologies that have been being used now in the Web 2 world for some time. And if you ever log into an app and it uses Google OAuth or OIDC, that is a way to provide some portability to your identity. So, in other words, you can use this identity in various applications. And all the application has to do is utilize the API that is provided by Google. In fact, you'll see here in a little bit that my app actually is actually on one level, it's using Google OAuth. So um, the problem with that ultimately is that you don't own the data. I'm going to go ahead and share a little bit of this screen here. And I'm just going to go through a quick description of what that does and what that is. So I'm going to share the screen here. And for now, I'm just going to share this. Uh, all we're really looking at here is a set of slides I've created. But it's the description of um, why probably what is more than likely, uh, defined as Web 2 legacy logins, Web 2 legacy authentication, authorization sort of logins. So we have to think about what are the problems we have with using, using the authentication authorization methods that are provided right now in Web 2. And, we all know that the internet is filled with bots, AI bots, fake accounts, nefarious actors, and so on and so forth. Obviously, this makes online interactions dangerous and costly, potentially dangerous and costly for business and social activities. So the identity challenges are if you use, for example, uh, if you were to consistently all the time and all the apps that you had, you would have you would probably stick with like OpenID Connect, Google, right? But in this particular case, there's Microsoft, there's Apple, there's even GitHub. There are a variety of open ID Connect sort of scenarios. And then there are the scenarios of, for example, logging into Facebook or logging into X or something like that, right? So if you if if you think about this, your identity is spread between each one of these sort of login methodologies, right? So your identity is spread across many services, leading to lack of control and inconsistencies. Service providers own and profit from your data, potentially selling or misusing it. Um, to me, that's probably one of the big problems is that we are in an economy, we are in a we are in an environment where these big tech companies are using your data as the basic methodology of profit for their company, right? If you think about what an oligarchy is, um, they have control of it. They're using it. We are not profiting from it, right? So your identity is not secure and is duplicated across multiple services. You really have no idea where it's at, what it's doing, who owns it, who's selling it. So the foundational idea of Grokism is to separate the authorization, the authentication, and the usage layers, right? So um, the closest thing you can think of is, or the closest analogy I can probably come up with, is this idea of what's called ACLs or access control lists. So essentially, you authenticate, somebody gives you somebody gives you, permissions that you can actually utilize. Then you can use those permissions to actually do stuff to the resources that are in a local environment. But that's the problem, is that it's a local environment, right? So by separating the authorization, authentication, and the usage layers, it sort of changes the whole mechanism of and it changes the mechanism of how authentication authorization works in a Web3 world. The authorization layer is the layer where you register. If you're a company or an organization, you register the company, you log in as a company, and I'll show you how to do that here in a second. You log in as a company, and then what you do is you create a bookend, right? The bookend is the result of the registration. So this registration process, so when you go through and create a bookend, you can go through any number of processes. You can use biometrics, you can use um, any sort of methodology to confirm that this is a person, for one thing, that they have the rights to actually interact with whatever app you're going to build. So remember, if you think about a company or an organization, the company is then responsible in the end for utilizing or using what is ultimately going to turn out to be is a verified credential. So the authentication layer is basically a self-sovereign, decentralized digital ID. So you have a wallet, an identity wallet, and those proofs that are defined via what is called a permission set are pushed down to your identity wallet. So you would have a situation where you might have many permissions that are pushed into your identity wallet. The identity wallet has and the identity wallet has some characteristics. One of the things is your identity, or DID, basically is pushed to the blockchain. So in other words, it's written to the blockchain where it's immutable, where it's not changeable, things like that. The verifiable data registry is the thing that confirms that that DID is a valid thing, right? So essentially, it demands that your individual identity is safeguarded, and also it provides self-sovereignty, um, which means that you maintain control over your digital identity. You have the rights as an individual to control who has access to it, who can use it. There's a variety of things that that sort of enables that I'll post a video about that at some other later time. But the Grokism ecosystem, basically, the Grokism service in this particular parlance becomes the issuer of the verified credential in the form of perm sets. The verifier in this case is the organization or government or DAO or any organization or business that would want to use a service. And then you are the individual who owns the identity wallet that contains the credential, that contains the permission set. Um, the process itself has some characteristics, right? Ultimately, the app is going to log in and be assigned a JavaScript web token or a JSON web token. It has verified credentials, which are verified by the verifier, which in this case is the organization that created the bookend. The DApp consumption part is essentially when you build the DApp, it's going to have as part of its authentication process, it's going to be assigned a JavaScript web token, and then it's going to be assigned or it's going to be passed all of those proofs, those verified proofs, verified credentials that the individual actually has and that are relevant for the actual DApp in this particular case. And then further, you can use this particular thing called Midnight to execute privacy preserving smart contracts, and Midnight blockchain use zero knowledge proofs. So in other words, in Midnight, you could take a permission set, a verified credential of the permission set, and you could execute smart contracts and zero knowledge proofs on that particular proof, right? What this allows us to do is to basically it enables an application developer, a DApp, from the necessity of building a whole authorization authentication service. All you need to do in this particular case is connect to the Grokism API, get, your DID has already been created, or if it hasn't been created, it will be created. And then once all that stuff is confirmed, then it will pass back a JavaScript web token and that list of permission sets that are, related to whatever the user is actually building on, right? So, in a lot of ways, I think of this as an entirely new sort of methodology to, to build apps, right, in a Web3 sort of way. So I define it from the perspective of, an app that has to concern itself with utilizing and building all of that authorization, authentication logic in the backside. So what we do is we have authentication, authorization logic separated in layers, and then those permissions are pushed down to the application, right? The DApp. This is an entirely different sort of methodology, and I would say it's quite revolutionary from the perspective of typically your authentication and authorization are pulled from like Google or something like that, right? So what we're doing is we're changing it up, pushing the authorization authentication down to the individual user in the form of permission sets, and then with DIDs, digital IDs. And then from there, the application simply uses those those DIDs that are already created as proof that that person is who they say they are and is a person. Um, and what we'll do is, so ultimately, this sort of changes the whole sort of way that applications use and consume authentication and authorization, right? So I'm going to give you a little bit of a demonstration of where I am with this app. So if you go back and look at the October 7th, I know, boy, the day I published that. Um, if you go back and look at the October 7th video that I made, which is in YouTube, um, uh, really I was just talking about the architecture of it. I got on the whiteboard and did all that stuff. But I really want to demonstrate the app here. So I'm going to give me a second. I'm going to start everything up. Well, let me do this just as a matter of proof. So I'll start by saying this app is using um, MongoDB Atlas. So the whole thing is probably what you would call a mean stack, which is MongoDB, uh, uh, MongoDB Express, Node, and Angular. So I do use all of those things in this particular app. So what I'm really going to do here is I'm going to start by I'm going to drop all these collections here. It's going to drop the collections so that we can look at fresh data. Drop collection. Just so we can get a sense of how it works from the beginning. So I think I've got some bookends here, so I'm going to drop those too. Drop the collection. Drop the collection. Okay, so as you can see now, there's nothing here. We're going to refresh all that. Um, Nothing here. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the share again, and then I'm going to go back to a different, I'm going to go back to this. Okay. So what you should see is, yeah, you see the my VS Code environment, that sort of thing. So I've already set it up so that uh, it it is, all of the stuff that's needed to actually run the code is already there. NPM, um, I've done all the NPM installs and set it up. So all I'm really going to do now is I'm going to start NPM start app. Run end. So the idea is ultimately that this stuff will all be deployed to it will all be deployed to a Kubernetes cluster. Um, and here we're just going to close that up at the moment. So I'm going to go ahead and restart this. Okay. And just for the sake of argument, I'm going to pull up the dev tools and we're going to watch those as we come in, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to register a new org name. Now, the thing is, this is live data. So in other words, this is pulling data directly from my Google OAuth account for Grokism LLC. In this particular case, um, the the org user that I'm creating is a Google Workspaces sort of thing. So essentially, I could import a list of Google Workspace users to actually serve as org users. So I'll describe this as we go along. So I'm going to register a new org name. I'm going to go through this process of using Google OAuth, just like it probably should. Well, it definitely should. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to register a new organization name, and what it's going to do here. And one of the things I do is I simply assign a default perm set. So in other words, it's the first perm set, and it's a default perm set. And the perm sets I will describe here in a little bit. They don't really mean anything. So what should happen is, if you notice the bottom left of my screen, you'll see that the database has been registered with all of the stuff that's necessary, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and log in as my user. And it goes through as the org user, goes through the same process. In this particular case, I'm going to add the Grokism LSC, and I'm going to add the user that I logged in with, and I can see that the organization user is Robert. So it's with a capital R, and that's correct. So I'm logged in, right? And as you can see, I've been assigned the admin role, which is the default role that gets assigned to the first user that creates the new organization. So what we've done is we've created a new organization. And so the organization itself is really the verifier. In the end, this is the organization or company, or government, whatever it may be. They're the ones that are going to verify. And what they're going to verify is this thing called a bookend. So right now, the organization Grokism has no bookends. I'm going to go ahead and create a bookend. And these bookends can be anything. So in other words, you could go through this process of, and it will certainly go through this process where these bookends will have additional authorization sort of information. Um, you could use any number of things, biometrics. You could have them have an organization and then have the individual actually be in person at this organization, and then the organization will confirm 100% that this is a real person and that we are giving them permission to do things. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. So I'm going to go ahead and just create I mean, this is the first bookend, so it's just going to be Rob Phillips. Username is Rob. And my email, this is a real email. In fact, ultimately, I am going to use Grokism.io to actually deploy this. When I get around to creating the Kubernetes cluster that all this stuff is going to run on, it will be deployed to Grokism.io. So in this particular case, all I have is one perm set, right? So I'm going to go ahead and use that one perm set to go ahead and create and add it to the users. In other words, what I've got here now is a bookend, and the bookend has a perm set of PS 330, 345. Now that doesn't really mean anything, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a new perm set. I'm just going to call it PS, let's see, interact with, add the perm set there. I can list the perm set. So now at my app, essentially I've built all the backend. So if I wanted to add a perm set to a bookend, I can do that. I just haven't enabled it for this particular exercise. So essentially what I could do is I could edit the bookend. And what it would allow me to do is add that new perm set. But in this particular case, I haven't done that. So, but I'm just going to go ahead and create a new bookend. And I'm just going to say, you know, vape data. Okay, so now I have a choice of two perm sets. So I'm going to just choose one, but I could choose both. Just like, so uh, this is basically just a pull down menu. So I create a bookend. So, and if I list the ordered bookends, I can see that that new bookend basically was added to the bookend. So if you get the concept of a permission set, so I'll spend a moment talking about what a permission set is. A permission set is, as my wife described, a golden ticket. Essentially, then these permission sets will get pushed down to your digital ID wallet in the form of a verified credential. And so what then will happen is the usage layer, so in other words, the DApp layer will then use the get a JSON web token from the Grokism API, and then the list of of permission sets that particular user or did has been assigned. So there could be a variety of perm sets. They're, verified credentials. So ultimately, these are called verified credentials. So there could be verified credentials that list, other perm sets that come from other organizations, that sort of thing. But the point is that again, that gets pushed down, right? It's a way to have to sort of have access control lists um, for environments that scale out to the world. And if you go to my Grokism website, you'll see I'm very interested in this idea of scaling out to the world. So instead of the data being contained within a single organization, now what happens is it's scaled out to the world. And there's a lot of things that have to be, have to happen for that to actually work right. But the self-sovereign, decentralized digital ID, the bookends has, the organization registration, a bookend registration has to be confirmed, which is pushed down. And then the DApp has to consume these particular things, right? So this all has to work together. Um, from the perspective of now, I haven't built yet this particular part. So the part um, that I'm working on right now, it's a big part, is this idea of when you click on that issue verified credential button. I'm going to go back to the dashboard. You'll see issue verified credential. And these are all admin actions that are based on the fact that you have an admin role assigned, an org role is what I call it in the database, issue verified credentials. And from the decentralized digital ID sort of parlance, the Grokism service is the issuer um, of the verified credential. The holder is the individual bookend, and the verifier is the organization or the one that registers the individual that gets represented as a bookend. And then that stuff all gets pushed down rather than pulled from the site or from Google, for example. It gets pushed down from the Grokism service, right? So there's a whole bunch of things I haven't built yet, but working on it very heavily. So we have this thing called Hyperledger Identis, which is the service that's actually going to provide for the self-sovereign digital ID sort of environment. And then there's going to be a few other services that are going to be part of this, and it's all going to be funneled through an API gateway. And I'm just in the process of building that. So um, the DApp receives a verified credential from the Identis edge agent in the form of perm sets defined by the organization, and the Identis service provides a JWT token. The verified perm set credentials can then be utilized by Midnight and ZKP and smart contracts as proof of knowing who and what you are interacting with. I mean, ultimately, that's kind of the whole point of this thing, is that if we go to, so there's this, I'm just going to go ahead. Here we go, active personhood credentials. So honestly, this is, we're going to view the PDF here. So the personhood credentials, essentially what we're doing in a world of Web 2 is we are providing for this thing called a personhood credential, which means that when you interact with someone in the internet, when you interact with them online, there is proof that the person you are interacting with is a human being. And there's a variety of different things you can do with that proof of human beings. And I'll talk about this thing, what I call, just public DAOs, I guess is probably what you'd call them. A public DAO where uh, there could be a publicly posted permission set, right? For some service, as a human. So you register as a human, um, and there's a permission set for that, right? And so then when you go through the process of getting a DID and all that stuff, and then the DApp on the end can say, and it doesn't need to know anything more about you. All it needs to know, for example, is that you're a human. You're actually a human, confirmed and registered on the backside, right? But no one knows anything about you. They don't know anything. They don't know anything about who you are. They don't know anything about it. All they know is that you're a human. And that's the purpose of this particular uh, paper. And this paper was published by, OpenAI, Harvard, Microsoft, Center for Human Compatible AI, University of California, Berkeley. But the problem with all of these things is that this whole article is about not owning your identity. This is a way, for example, for Microsoft or Google or something like that to provide a personhood credential, but yet still have ownership of your credential, of your data, right? So Grokism is a way for us to have ownership of our identity, but also to have a personhood credential, right? And the key is that you separate authentication, authorization, and the application layer, and you push the credentials down rather than pull them from someplace. I think it's a powerful thing. I think it's a powerful, powerful thing. And ultimately, in the future, you build apps with this whole thing, and boy, I think it's going to make a lot of difference to our ability to, to interact appropriately and to know who we're interacting with, and to be human again, to get our identity back, to profit from its use. You know, um, I could just think of a million sort of things, and I'm going to make another video here in just a little bit about this thing called what I'm calling, again, it's a public DAO, right? Um, but for now, I'm just going to leave it at that. And I'll make another video here in just a little bit. And so, all right. Thanks, guys.